Today we will be traveling to two different places to learn the local history on abolition, or the freeing of slaves in America. Our first stop is the Harriet Tubman Museum in Cape May. This recently built museum tells the stories and history of African Americans. Harriet Tubman, who was a leader of the Underground Railroad, actually lived in Cape May for a few years before returning to Maryland to bring more fugitive slaves to freedom. Visiting the museum will also tell the important role that Cape May played in abolition. Our next stop is a Quaker meeting house in Tuckerton, New Jersey. The connection between these two places is that Quakers were some of the first people to stop trading slaves and to help bring slaves to freedom.
Let's start the tour. First of all, I'll introduce myself to everyone. Good afternoon, each and every one of you. My name is Ross, and I'm going to be your tour guide for the next hour. Welcome to the Harriet Tubman Museum of Cape May. The Harriet Tubman Museum of Cape May is an enormous source of pride for both the African American community, the city of Cape May, and the state of New Jersey. Let's talk about the floor that we're standing on, shall we? Please take a look at the floor. This floor is not the original floor for this building. This floor, in fact, has been repurposed. This floor once was a floor that was in a home that was designated for demolition in Cape May Point. If any of you have been to the lighthouse or the concrete ship, that's the city of Cape May Point. That's where this home is located. The home was eventually demolished and ultimately destroyed, but prior to the demolishing of the home, the floor was taken out. This floor that you're standing on was placed in the museum once the museum became the museum. Prior to it becoming the museum, however, it was the Howell House, H-O-W-E-L-L, donated to the Macedonian Church by a Quaker family named Howell. Once it became property of the church, it became the parsonage for the church, as you heard in the presentation. Reverend Davis pastored the Macedonian Baptist Church for 47 years, nearly a half a century. He lived in this house for 41 years. The floor is repurposed. It's from a home from the Underground Railroad. It is considered to be hallowed ground because beneath these floorboards were once harbored African slaves on their way from enslavement to freedom. Furthermore, this home, which was once the Howell House and the parsonage for the Macedonian Baptist Church, is now proudly the Harriet Tubman Museum of Cape May. The transition has been difficult, but it was all made possible due to generous donations and very active and interested, civic-minded people in the city of Cape May. I'd like to tell you about Reverend Davis. He left a legacy that is three-pronged. Not just these three things, but these are the three things that encompass his legacy that make him most notable. He was a pastor, he was in the business of saving souls, and business was good. In addition, Reverend Davis was a choir master, and he was the master of a wonderful choir which toured locally and throughout the state. Thirdly, but not least, he was an educator. Reverend Davis felt as though it was incumbent upon him to instill a sense of pride in the community at large about African history in order to give African Americans a sense of pride in themselves and to have African Americans understand completely that we have a history that preceded slavery that we could be proud of. Let's talk about slavery in New Jersey, because that's where we are, right? We're going to move fast now. Quakers decided that they wanted to not bring slaves to the Quaker meetings anymore, so they ceased and desisted in doing so. Quaker meetings is the same thing as Quaker church, by the way. Then Quakers decided that they did not want to engage in the slave practice anymore at all, so they stopped trading human flesh altogether. That was a good thing. The state of New Jersey decided to follow suit in 1804. They passed a law called gradual emancipation. And gradual emancipation went like this. If you're a woman, you have to remain enslaved until you're 21 years old. If you're a man, you have to remain enslaved until you're 25 years old. Then in 1846 rather, New Jersey got really creative and decided to pass another law that was meant to abolish slavery, but it didn't, because all it did was rename and reword slavery, and they reworded it apprentice for life. However, as a result of this minuscule, painfully slow emancipation process in New Jersey, free African-American communities did spring up in Lower Cape-May and throughout the state. One such community was the Union Devil community. Although that community is no longer there, Mount Sinai Cemetery is where many of the people who live in that community are currently interned forever, and you can access that community, that cemetery, Route 9 North. You make a left at Tabernacle Road, Route 9 South, you make a right on Tabernacle Road, and it is right there. The Underground Railroad is not a choo-choo-choo-choo-choo. It's a metaphor. It represents a series and a system of people, places, things, and resources that are specifically put into place to aid African-American enslaved people from enslavement to freedom. 1850, the United States passed a law if you slave act, that if you are a runaway slave, you could be brought back and punished of the price on your head. That was a law. So that meant that in these towns in black, if I came through there and I was on the run, they would give me a meatloaf sandwich and a fresh horse and keep me moving. They weren't going to call slave catchers on me, and I wouldn't be in any danger. If the town was red, now we got to see, I got to talk about this. Let's say I'm on the run, and I see a quilt hanging in your yard. If that quilt has an apple on it, that means I can stop there and get something to eat. If I see a quilt hanging in your yard and I'm on the run, if that quilt has a hammer or a sickle on it, that means there's a tool in your barn that I can use to break my shackles with. Cape-May was a headquarters for the Underground Railroad, and Harriet Tubman was its chief conductor as early as 1852. Come this way, please. This room is a legacy room that's left, speaking of the notion of a legacy left behind by African Americans who are no longer here.
Now let's explore Quakerism close to home, across the street from the Tuckerton Seaport.
Hello, my name is Sean Knievi. I'm here at the Little Lake Harbor Society of Friends Meeting House. The Friends are also known as the Quakers. I've been attending here for the last 3 years, and I've been clerk for the last year. Clerk is an administrative title and coordinator. Quakers have no formal clergy, priests, or pastors. We're all considered ministers because we believe each of us can connect with the Spirit of God without any intermediary. This current meeting house was built in 1863. The original meeting house was built in 1709. The meeting actually started in 1702 because people would meet in their homes or outside, if it's a nice day like today, rather than a building. A building is just a meeting place. It's nothing special or sacred, unlike church buildings. We also have no ornamentation. It's very plain and functional. First Quakers came here in 1699 from the Mount Holly area. This whole area was part of Burlington County originally, and for over 200 years. Two brothers came, Edward Andrews and Mordecai Andrews. They settled here among the Lenape people who have lived here for over 10,000 years. The Andrews brothers each built a mill on each side of the creek. One built the grist mill, one built the sawmill. After a few years, other people came, and they were enough where they could build the first Quaker Meeting House building. And we've been meeting here ever since. The Quaker Meeting House is surrounded by the Quaker burial ground. Most of the graves are unmarked. They date back to about 1711. They're unmarked for a reason, not because people couldn't afford gravestones, but because they were very simple and do not like to have any statues or monuments. So there's a few grave markers with names, and some of the early graves were marked with just a stone or a clamshell, most with nothing. All the early settlers were Quakers, and are all buried here, starting with Henry Jacobs Falkenberg and his second wife, who was a Quaker, the Andrews brothers, and then other families that are still around here today, including Farrows, Crammers, the Bartletts, Mathis family, the Horner family, and even some of the early Quakers were African Americans, such as the Mapps family and the Washington family. Over the years, after the state of New Jersey was formed and the United States were formed, some of the Quakers got more involved in government and business and left to join newer Christian churches, such as Methodist, Baptist, or Presbyterian. So you'll see all the same names in all the different cemeteries in the area. But a lot of people either have the same last name or their grandparents did. We also used to have a school here, I was told, a little one-room school, which is no longer here. The Quakers originally started in America along the Delaware River, which is where most of the settlements started in South and West Jersey. Salem, Burlington, Mount Holly, Mansfield, Rancocas. There was really nothing here in the Pinelands except the Native Americans who hunted and fished and camped here and usually went to the Delaware River in the winter. The Quaker form of worship is a silent meditation for 40 minutes where people listen to the Spirit of God for inspiration, just like the writers of the Bible received directly from God. Quakers believe that anybody can receive messages from God, be inspired by God. So there's no distractions, there's no statues, banners, stained glass, ornaments. And there's no altar, there's no pulpit. That's because everyone is equal, even children, men, women, and children right from the beginning. The Quaker movement was founded in England by George Fox, a teenager. He was 19, and he went around preaching, and he had several followers in the beginning, including Margaret Fell, who became one of the co-founders of Quakerism. Right from the beginning, Quakers were equal. This was starting in 1650. Back then, and for a long time afterwards, in fact, probably into the 1960s, men dominated everything: government, education, churches. The Quakers all worshiped together, men, women, and children, in this big room. However, at the monthly business meeting, where matters were discussed regarding the operation, administration of the meeting and the meeting house grounds, the meeting was split into two for business. One was for women and one was for men. Not to shut women out, but on the contrary, to make sure that they had equal participation. And that was done by a wall that came down, separating the meeting house in two. There's gears up in the attic, they're no longer working, but it used to be lowered during the monthly business meeting so the women could have their own meeting, speak freely, ask questions, and not be intimidated by their fathers or brothers or any other men that tend to dominate meetings even today. Grandfathered in. We're not going to have any more slaves. We're not going to bring slaves from Africa. But if you're a slave now, you're a slave for the rest of your life. So when New Jersey said slavery is abolished, the 10-year-old kid would become a slave for the next 60 years. It wasn't abolished. It was, they ended the slave trade. And also during the Civil War, when Lincoln had the Emancipation Proclamation, he only freed the slaves in the states fighting the Union, and it was not enforceable. He didn't free any slaves in the Union states, and there were slaves in the Union states.
David Mapps and the Washington family were early African American Quaker settlers in Tuckerton. The Bartlett and Andrews families were also notable early Quaker settlers in this area. Their historic homes are located on the grounds of the Tuckerton Seaport. Explore more about the people of Tuckerton at the Tuckerton Seaport and Bayman's Museum.